I don't want to be talking to you. I really don't. I wish I could put on mask and not be here. But I am, because in my heart, in my mind, in my entire being, I know that we are on a path that is frightening. There are people all over the earth that have had experiences similar to mine. And we are all waiting for the right time to stand up in unity, and come forward and speak to the world. And immediately this rush came over me and I thought, oh, this is it. And he said, have you ever worked for the CIA or the FBI? And of course, I'm 22 years old. I don't want to have anything to do with this. I'm thinking, why is this happening to me? So what makes this fascinating is that as a child growing up, my father on numerous occasions had told me a story of him being on the streets of Paris during the war, because of course he's from Europe, and how a man approached him. And what my father said was that they asked him to become part of the psychic army, the Russian psychic army. And he kept saying to me, if they ever come to you, do not go with them. Do you understand? Don't ever go with them, because if you do, they will own you. I was shown an image of being in an underground base, that what took place there was so dark and ugly and horrifying to me that it was difficult for me to deal with. What are you doing here? Why can't you just leave me alone? And then I walked on board the craft. The knowledge is that we're not alone, that we're being watched, that what we're doing is being looked upon by other beings that do have a certain amount of knowledge that we ourselves do not have. I have seen the future through them with their assistance. I believe that because we are being awakened to begin sharing this information with people, that there are great changes that are coming, and that we need to all understand that. Whether it was going to be a meteor hitting the earth, or whether it was going to be war breaking out, or whether it was going to be famine, or there was going to be earth changes that took place, any of these things, that man had the ability to change this timeline of what it was that was going to be coming.
Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and we're here with Miriam Delicado, and she's got a website called alienbluestar.com, and she's got a very interesting story to tell. She's a contactee, and she has a special relationship with the Hopi and the Mayan peoples, as we will see as we go forward. Hi, Miriam. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Carrie.
Absolutely. It's a real pleasure. I've read your book. It's a wonderful book. And why don't you just start at the beginning, whatever feels comfortable, and tell the people your story, and let's go from here.
Okay. To start, it's a very, very big story, and it's difficult for me to be able to convey to people the story of my life, which is what I tried to do a little bit in my book, Bluestar, is give people an overview of many of the things that have happened to me. I've had a very interesting past 20 years of my life, where I've had numerous contacts with extraterrestrials from other places. And often people have asked me where it is that these beings are from, and that's a very big question. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But to give the viewers an overview, my life started out very strange right from the very beginning. And my life was not an ordinary one when I was growing up. I first started to notice that I was different probably when I was about 2 years old. And I actually have memories that could take me all the way back to being a baby, as well as most of my remembering came back to me when I was about 2. So when I was probably about 9 years old, my psychic abilities started to kick in, and numerous strange things started to happen to me. I was having very vivid dreams and all sorts of things along those lines that I really couldn't explain. I used to play this little game when I was a child about watching the people in the car as I was driving past them in a car, and I would try to think of what they were saying or thinking in their heads. And when I did that, it was fascinating to me, some of the things that I would hear them thinking about. But at the same time, I was always scared that they would know that I was, probing into their minds. And I never wanted to get caught doing that. So that's a very, very clear memory for me ever since I was very, very young. It's not something that I do now. It's not something that I do consciously ever at any point, because, of course, I would have to ask someone's permission in order to do that. So right from the very beginning, I was a little bit different. And as my life moved forward, these abilities of mine just became stronger and stronger. And by the time I was a teenager, I was doing all sorts of things. I was having dreams that were prophetic in to use terms that people would understand. I saw a number of visions that actually came true within a very short period of time. And I also had encounters with sort of beings that I wasn't clear with where they were from or what focus they were, where they came from. And it was really unnerving for me growing up, because even though I knew that my father had some sort of abilities as well, I wasn't close enough to him to be able to talk to him about it. And that made my earlier years very difficult, just for that reason alone. Now, my father was an interesting character in my life because he seemed to possess certain abilities as well. And when we were kids, we were always, a little bit nervous around him, thinking that he would always know what we were doing. So when jumping way forward into my life, into the year 1988, which is 20 years ago, it was interesting when I did have this encounter on the highway in northern British Columbia with extraterrestrials. And this was a physical encounter that took place that changed my entire life. But when it happened, it was almost immediate that I knew that my father had had contact. Simply because a number of the things that I was told by these beings, my father used to talk about when we were kids all the time, about how the world would eventually change and how we needed to learn how to survive and what it is that we needed to do, this type of thing. So I always knew that he'd had contact. And
didn't he also work for the, an agency, secret, in intel in some capacity?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, because you talk about him being approached, and he also warned you about being approached at some point. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And how do you know that unless, you've been approached?
That was a very interesting story that my father used to tell me as a child. It was a fascinating story that always, made me really nervous, and I had no clue as to what he was talking about. So what I need to do is step forward past 1988. It was a couple of years later, and I was working in a little yogurt shop. And this is a really fascinating piece to this puzzle for my life. And even I myself am still to this day made a little bit weary of it. So the year was, a couple of years after 1988, and I was working in this yogurt shop, and I was just having a normal day, or I was trying to. And this man walked past the window of the shop, and he looked directly at me into my eyes. And when he did, he came right in the door, walked right up to me, looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Do you work for the CIA or the FBI?" And I said, "No, I don't." And immediately this rush came over me, and I thought, oh, this is it. And he said, have you ever worked for the CIA or the FBI? And of course, I'm 22 years old. I don't want to have anything to do with this. I'm thinking, why is this happening to me? I said, no, I haven't. And then he proceeded to tell me, he said, have you ever thought about working for the Russians? And of course I said, absolutely not. And he then proceeded to tell me how the Russians had been working with people like myself for a very long time, and that if I joined them, that I would never be alone again, that I would be surrounded with people that were like me. And I said I was not interested. And what he was talking about was a psychic program. And he said that this psychic program had been going on for a very long time. And of course I knew all about this. And I very nicely, politely, with a smile on my face, looked at this man and said that I was not interested. And he kept pushing and saying, do you know how strong you are? And I smiled at him. I said, yes, I do know how strong I am. And he said, but can you control your abilities? And I said, actually, I can. And then he said that they would still be very much interested in working with me. And I told him that there was no way. I said, what I would like you to do is go back to the people that sent you here, thank them very much for their interest, and tell them that there's no point in ever coming back because I will never be interested. So what makes this fascinating is that as a child growing up, my father on numerous occasions had told me a story of him being on the streets of Paris during the war, because of course he's from Europe, and how a man approached him. And what my father said was that they asked him to become part of the psychic army, the Russian psychic army. And he kept saying to me, if they ever come to you, do not go with them. Do you understand? Don't ever go with them, because if you do, they will own you. You can't run and you can't hide because they will find you with their minds. And so, of course, I was always very frightened by this, and it didn't make any sense to me growing up. But in that moment, as soon as the man walked into the store and said, do you work for the CIA or the FBI? I knew exactly who he was, what he was there to ask me, and I was very adamant that I was not interested. And I'm not interested for anyone to do something along those lines.
Okay, yeah, I remember that story from your book, and I think it's a real bell ringer. I think your father had what, maybe Native American blood in somewhere in there. He's certainly got I don't know, European. What would you say your background is, just in terms of genetics, I guess?
My mother is German, and as far as I know, all the way back, she's German. My father is Yugoslavian, and as far as I know, his family history going far, like way, 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 way back, I believe that there's some interesting blood there. But for me to say anything for certain would not be fair to him or to anyone, because I am not sure. But as far as Native American blood goes, no, I don't believe that there is. But with his bloodline, if there's anyone interested in looking it up, that would be able to go very far back, meaning, you know, even thousands of years, I think that it would be fascinating to see where it led.